So basically, the captain in this episode went full Captain Jellicoe, which I really don't see a problem with that. Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of Star Trek Lower Decks, Episode 3, Temporal Edict. You know, when I heard that title, I was really excited to get our first time travel episode of this series, but you know, sometimes the best things are worth waiting for. But other than that little nugget, which isn't really a spoiler, it's just a non-spoilery spoiler? Sure, we'll go with that. But besides that, as always, I'm going to give my spoiler-free thoughts on this episode up front for those of you who are unable to watch the episode or just haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet and just want to know if it's worth your time. So we'll dive into that and then we'll get into more of my spoiler thoughts in just a little bit. But what did I think of this episode from a non-spoiler point of view? One of my biggest concerns coming out of last episode of Lower Decks was I was mildly concerned that this show was going to be a bit too in-jokey for a lot of us Trek fans. Last episode, there was a lot of jokes that felt like that I was laughing at as a Trek fan, but when I showed it to some of my friends who aren't necessarily as on the up and up on Star Trek as I am, they found it funny, but they were a little bit frustrated by the fact that they knew that they weren't getting some of the jokes, and the show was kind of making them integral to enjoying some of the laughter and humor of the moments. This episode, I think, did a much better job of, while still making it fit within the Star Trek world, allowing a lot of the humor to come out of the moments and the characters rather than knowing a lot of in-jokes of Star Trek. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a bunch of jokes, and I'll talk a little bit more about these in the spoiler section, but there are a ton of jokes that I would laugh hysterically at just because they were Star Trek in references, especially the last joke in the episode. A lot of you will know exactly what joke I'm referencing. But overall, I just thought that the humor in this episode really felt much more inclusive of non-Trek fans, which honestly can be a plus or minus depending on your mood or what you're looking for with this show. Honestly, I really enjoyed last episode with a lot of its in-Trek humor, but I also want Star Trek to be something that I share with others, and as much as I love Discovery and Picard, I think that this is a great show to sort of get someone into Star Trek if they don't want to dive into something so big and heavy like those shows are. And so to have an episode of this show that shows me that it can be more than just a big in-joke for all of us Trek fans really gets me very excited for the future of the show going forward, where it can kind of do both at the same time. It can have those in-jokes to just make me laugh hysterically as a Trek fan, but really bring other people in. The other thing that I really loved from this episode, without spoiling too much, is that it did something that I really love about Star Trek while still feeling unique to what this show is, and that's take a big issue, a prescient issue, and put it into the Star Trek world. But the issue that this episode deals with, again, without spoiling, feels like it could only have been done from a sort of lower decks, sort of grunt worker perspective. It's something that you wouldn't necessarily have gotten to see on sort of the more high-minded, political, big philosophical ideas on Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or Voyager, or something like that, or Enterprise, or any of them, really. So I just like that this felt like it had the flavor of Star Trek, but a flavor that felt unique to this show at the same time. And again, it's hard to talk more about that without getting too spoilery. So let's wrap up my spoiler thoughts. I really liked this episode. I thought it had a good inclusive humor for everyone, Trek fans and non-Trek fans alike, though it still had a lot of those big laugh out loud moments overall. And I definitely think that this show has really started to find its voice as a Trek show within the Trek universe, which is honestly surprising for a show only in its third episode. So fantastic job with this episode of Lower Decks. But let's dive into spoilers. So if you haven't seen the episode, stop here and come back when you've watched it, or if you don't care about spoilers, just keep going, because I like the watch time on YouTube. Helps me get seen. Please do that. One other thing before we get much further, though, I just want to make a mention of tomorrow. If you are watching this the day this video goes up, I have a big video coming out that's going to include Lore Runner and Steve Shives, two other big Trek YouTubers. It's a lot of fun. I think it's very funny. It's going to dive into some philosophy sort of stuff. It's a big comedic video that I've done kind of before, and I'm really excited to share it with all of you. So please join us. It's going to live premiere at noon Pacific time tomorrow. And if you are seeing this video after that for some reason, then it's up. Go watch it now. Should be fun. I'll even see if I can link it up here if I remember to do that and I'm not lazy. If it didn't pop up, that means I was lazy. So there you go. But let's dive into my spoiler-filled thoughts in this episode. So like I alluded to back in my spoiler-free section, I really loved the actual concept of this episode. I loved the idea that the captain of the Cerritos really learned about the crew's buffer time, the time that really all of us do in any sort of job that's sort of a menial job or a job with really anyone who has a supervisor of any sort, is where you kind of fudge the numbers a little bit on how long a task is going to take you in order that you don't have to rush it, you don't have to like get it done right this second, and you can relax a little bit, maybe like get a little bit of a break if you need it. Anyone who's worked at a Starbucks or Target or Walmart or really any type of job like that, or even some jobs that are higher than that, to be honest, knows what that feeling or that need is as a worker. And that felt like a concept that was a prescient concept. I mean, in capitalism, in the world we live in right now, sorry, I don't mean to make it a capitalist rant, but it's kind of a capitalist rant. In the world we live in right now, every second of your time is meant to be valuable. You need to be working every second or else you're not worthwhile. You need to have every piece of your life planned and doing something. And that can be overstrenuous. It can be hard. It can be not conducive to what human beings just need in a daily life. You can't work yourself to death. And so that's a very prescient topic that a lot of us have felt on an almost daily basis, but it's also a topic that you wouldn't have really seen on Star Trek The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or Voyager, because those shows are dealing with sort of bigger political and grander topics. But this is a show about the lower decks, about the sort of menial workers on a starship. So the topics that those workers would get addressed would be things like this, with your every single moment of your life needing to be planned out and sort of dictated by your supervisors, and that sort of tension between those in command and those in the lower decks, and sort of the issues that arise from that natural dynamic. It was just a perfect way to use this specific show to talk about a prescient issue. But I also loved that it dove into the characters and told us a lot more about the characters. Again, with this episode, we get a lot more with Boimler and Mariner than we do with Rutherford and Tendi. And I like what the episode does with both of those characters. With Boimler, I adored the fact that he just thrived under the buffer time rule and didn't even like realize that certain things are going on. Like, he didn't even know that they were getting boarded. He like didn't realize he had a phaser at one point when the people were attacking him. And the fact that he didn't even realize that everyone else was on buffer time too, that he was just so focused on the task at hand that he just lost perspective of the world around us. So it was nice to see Boimler get a win in some senses in this episode. Like, even at the end of the episode, the Boimler effect was named after him, and that is a win. But it also, again, showed the flaws and where Boimler needs to learn and grow and become a better person. But I like that it wasn't like beating down on him like the last two episodes were. I like that he got to be successful and show what he was good at in this episode. So some really hilarious moments there. Mariner, I loved her sort of tension with Ransom. It made a lot of sense where Mariner, again, as someone who is very brusque, doesn't really follow the command structure, that she would get angry at Ransom, sort of get angry at how he looks down on the lower decks people, because that's something that you would see in Riker. Like, watch the episode Hollow Pursuits of Next Generation. Riker would do that with people like Barclay. And so that's, again, a natural sort of point of tension that we've seen throughout Star Trek, and I like Mariner pointing it out. But I also like Ransom. There were some things that were a bit iffy in terms of his character choices, but it also made sense for his sort of stickler personality, and also him wanting to protect others, like him stabbing Mariner in the foot to protect her. I know some people may have a problem with the way Ransom acted in this episode. I totally would understand that, but it worked for me. And I also liked that there was this sort of budding romance between the two, like going on. How Mariner's like, oh, I don't find this hot, do I? I also like the fact that he was basically a referencing to Kirk. Ransom is basically Kirk or Riker, because Riker was basically a pseudo-Kirk on The Next Generation. So perfect fit on that level going on there. One negative I will say, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I didn't like the fact that Rutherford and Tendi didn't get a ton to do in this episode. They were sort of in the background. And that's, other than Rutherford's stuff last episode, we still haven't really gotten a lot of fleshing out of those characters. Like, I get Tendi to a bit, that she's sort of this fresh-faced ensign, a way for a lot of us watching the show to sort of get to know the crew and the other characters. She's sort of our in character, but I really don't have a bead on who Rutherford is as a person yet. I don't really have any, like, true characteristics of him that really make him stand out or unique or give him a fully fleshed out personhood, as it were. So I am a little bit frustrated by that, and I'm sort of keeping an eye on how Rutherford develops throughout the series. And then the last major thing is I just loved the alien species here, the crystal people. They were always yelling about crystals, like, yeah, crystals, we love crystals. That was very funny, and I just like the idea of a Star Trek alien that is defined by one characteristic or interest is played up for laughs here. I mean, how many times in Star Trek do we have species that are like, we're all about this one very specific thing and nothing else? And so the fact that they were all about crystals in this episode just speaks speaks to Star Trek and all those types of aliens. And it was really funny to sort of see it played up for laughs here. And one last section that I'm going to try and start adding at the end of my videos. It would take me way too long to sit here and list to you all my favorite jokes throughout the episode and try and remember every single one and say, I like this, I like this, I like this. So I'm just going to list at the end of these videos some of the jokes that I really, really adored in the episode, the ones that made me laugh out loud, because there were quite a few. And like I said, a lot of them were more Trek in jokes, but not all of them. I love the joke about the roll up the sleeves. I mean, we've seen in many Trek shows that characters never roll up the sleeves because they literally couldn't. They couldn't like push them up. O'Brien on Deep Space Nine was the only time we really got to see a character do that quite often. And it makes sense. So I like that that was sort of an in-joke here. I loved the adjudication geo. Just the name of that made me just laugh out loud. The one that made me die, because I feel this to my core, was the fact when Ransom was attacking the alien in the sort of arena, and he says, I respect your sovereignty, and Mariner goes, so ethical, and she's so turned on by that. I feel that in my soul, everybody. I feel that in my very soul. There is nothing sexier than a man who respects ethics and people's rights. Seriously, I know that that's like a joke, but also it's very, very true. There's nothing that turns me on more than you like understanding people's basic needs as human beings. Super turns me on. Just saying. It's sad, but it's true. I also loved the intruder volleyball, that the Bajoran security guard was like playing volleyball with the intruders at the end of the episode. And then, of course, my favorite episode of the whole show was the last one of the episode where we go to the far future and we see the teacher teaching, like, this is the most important person in all of Starfleet. And of course, the most important person in all of Starfleet is Miles O'Brien. I just died. I absolutely died at that moment. Very Trek in-jokey, and I think it was fine to end the episode on sort of like an in-joke like that. It was just hysterical and so true. I think the only joke that didn't really work for me, and it worked at first, was the spear joke when Mariner says, we live in a spaceship, no one's dying from spears. That made sense. That was very funny, very much a reference to TOS, like Galileo 7, where someone died from a spear wound in that episode. I liked that joke, but then they had to like literalize it where Mariner says like, who am I, Captain Kirk? Kind of right after that moment, and kind of beating us over the head with that joke. That's where I think it went a little bit too far with the member berries and sort of hitting us over the head of the Trek in joke. It's like, I got it. You didn't really need to say it again or reiterate it and kind of beat me over the head with where the joke was coming from. Just felt like a bit much and a bit too like making sure like, hey, you get the joke, right? So that was the only one that didn't really work for me. But overall, the humor I thought was absolutely hysterical. Two quick things that I forgot to mention when I was actually recording the video. First off, I completely forgot the opening of this episode. I'm really liking how Lower Decks is having these sort of like slice of life openings that really don't have anything else to do with the rest of the episode, that sort of plays on tropes from throughout Star Trek, and this one being one of those like very sedate, very boring classical concerts, and then Mariner coming up and just rocking house. Was hysterical, and again, a great send-up of those tropes of Next Generation, where everyone would just go down into the 10 forward and play like classical cello music and trombones and all that stuff, which I like that music too, but come on, someone's going to be rocking out on the Starfleet ships. It's going to happen. Loved that. And then also, weird little canon nuggets that I found to be super fascinating. The joke at the beginning of this, when they were talking about going to Cardassia Prime to have a peace treaty, does that mean Cardassia Prime is now at peace with everybody and they're kind of more neutral after the Dominion War? That's super fascinating. Also, if you caught it, at the end of the episode in the very, very far future, one of the alien kids that was in the classroom was a little Borg, which is another really curious nugget, because does that mean that the Borg eventually integrated in the Federation but still remain Borg even though they weren't de-assimilated or anything like that? Or is that kid like a 7 of 9 type character who's sort of been removed from the collective? We don't know for sure. There's probably no way to know, but I'm sure that will fuel endless fan debates. I'm sure. I thought it was kind of cool. What do you think about that? All right, that's enough of my ranting. I'd love to hear what all of you now thought of this episode. Let me know down in the comments below. Did you like this episode? Did you hate it? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts. Don't forget tomorrow that I have that video coming out with Lore Reloaded and Steve Shives. I'm super excited to see all of you join us at noon Pacific time tomorrow at the live premiere. And if you can't make it, totally fine. I hope you just get the chance to watch it, because it was really a labor of love and something I really love doing. So I just wanted to promote it a little bit here. But if you don't want to miss that video or any of the other videos that I do here on this channel, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I also have a Patreon that you can really help make these videos better, help me be able to do this more full time and focus on a lot of other cool projects that I have floating around in my brain pan but don't really have time for at the moment. I also have some podcasts. I do What the Frel with Council of Geeks, an LGBTQ geek creator where we watch Farscape. I also do Star Trek Behind the Lines, which is a Star Trek comedic RPG podcast. I do all that stuff, but regardless of if you comment, subscribe, help me on my Patreon, subscribe to the podcast, I'm just glad that you stopped by, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Should probably do it on this side because that's where the space for the video is. Live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, and a special thank you to Piston Twisted Garage, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Bergmas, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Alexander Miller, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Mouse Pounder, Jemshin, Susan Banks, Wellington Marcus, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, John Stell, Gavin Robinson, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Jason Knott, Maeve, Stephen Clinard, Zach Cody, Subraxis, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Dante St. James, Gretchen Badger, Polly Mina, Din Hagney, and Bree Beecher. Thank you so much to all of you. I could not do this without you, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.